Good evening, friends. Back again, reading passages from Inner Work of Avodat Hashem, Teachings of Rav Ashlag. We're on page 111. Torah learning is not about accumulating information, but rather about coming close to God. This means learning how to give and have emunah in ways that transcend our ego. Right, so Torah learning and spiritual practice is not about accumulating information. That's not the purpose of the Torah. It's not the purpose of Judaism. It's not the purpose of Torah learning. People who just sit and study Talmud all day long just to accumulate information, to say that they've learned this many books and they know this many, this and this, this and this. That's not the point. The point is coming close to God. You learn Torah as a means to coming close to God. If you're not learning Torah as a means to coming close to God, then it's pointless. It's not what it's meant for. And coming close to God is about learning how to give, to be a giver, to move away from self-centered receiving, and to come into a greater connection with others, to care about them, and to give to them, and to have emunah, embodied faith, that God's creation is amazing, that God's presence is always here, shining down upon us, shining God's love. And we're here to receive that and to be in service to the divine. So we're here to have emunah in ways that transcend our ego, that transcend our sense of separate self, that transcend our giving only to ourselves, concern only about ourselves, that orbit around our individual identity. Holiness means separation. Separation from loving only ourselves. Holiness is working to love others and to be in divine service, even when our ego does not agree. So here the Rav is saying that holiness means separation. It means separation from loving only ourselves, right? From being, again, in that orbiting around only ourselves, our separate identity, our separate needs. But holiness is working to love others and to be in divine service, to feel others as an extension of the divine, that we're all connected, we're all an extension of the divine, here to serve the divine, to be expressions of the divine, to speak as the divine, to have our identities in alignment with the divine, to love others and be in divine service even when our ego does not agree, even when our separate self-consciousness is saying, you shouldn't do that, you should just worry about yourself, you should just be concerned about yourself and let others take care of themselves. What we want to ask for when performing the spiritual practice of a mitzvah is to feel the greatness of God who is giving us the mitzvah. What we want to ask for when performing the spiritual practice of a mitzvah is to feel the greatness of God who is giving us the mitzvah, right? So what we want to pray for, what we want to ask for and pray for when we're performing a spiritual practice of a particular mitzvah or a particular spiritual practice is to feel the greatness of God who is giving us the mitzvah, right? So when we say, Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, that you made us holy through your commandments, and you commanded us to do X, right? That we're thinking about the you that commanded us. We're thinking about the divine who gave us the mitzvah in the first place. That's what makes the mitzvah powerful, is that it is given by and directed by the divine. So that should be our kavanah, our intention when we're doing a mitzvah, a spiritual practice, that it is God who gave us the spiritual practice, who is imbuing the spiritual practice with energy. The Rebbe Zatzal would say, quote, "What do we need to remember? Only one thing, God, nothing more. We don't need to remember a lot of things. It's not complicated," end quote. So Reb Baruch Ashlag would say that we only need to remember one thing. We just need to remember God. It's not complicated. We don't need to remember a lot of other things. We don't need to remember a lot of things. All we need to do is remember God. Hashem Echad, God is one, God is here, everything is God. That is the mantra that we need to be constantly bringing into our consciousness, to see ourselves and the world differently, to see through the mundane, the appearance, the illusion of mundane reality, and to see through to the light, the divine light that's shining in all of creation. That's the one thing we need to remember. Straightforward. Why is it so hard for us to remember that we are in the reality of God? Why do we need to keep reminding ourselves about this one thing? Because the ego has selective memory and only remembers what is good for itself. The ego has selective memory and only remembers what is good for itself. Giving and believing are not good for the ego, so it doesn't want to remember God. Right? Great question, right? Why is it so hard for us to remember that we are in the reality of God? If God is everything and all God's light is shining through all of creation, why is it so hard for us to remember that? Why do we need to keep reminding ourselves about this one thing? You know, the one thing the Rebbe said above in the previous passage, remembering God, one thing. Why do we need to keep reminding ourselves about this one thing? Why is it so hard? And the answer is because the ego has selective memory. It only remembers what is good for itself. Giving and believing, emunah, are not good for the ego. Right? They're not good for the ego because they dissolve the focus, the orbit around the individual self, the separate self-consciousness. And they push the focus out towards others and towards creation, and they take it away. They take the energy and the focus away from the ego, the separate self, identity consciousness. So the ego doesn't want to remember God. It gets in the way of the ego fulfilling its desires. Its desire for personal pleasure and all the different various forms that it comes in. And it's directly under attack, actually. And this is also, many Eastern traditions say the same thing, that the ego spiritual practice is an attack on the ego. It is it is, it's part of its purpose is to destroy the ego. At least that's in Eastern philosophy. We're not trying to destroy the ego. We're trying to direct it differently and then integrate it. So the ego is fighting for its life, essentially. When we're doing spiritual practice, the ego is putting up resistance because it's afraid that it's going to be obliterated, that it will be destroyed. So it's going to work inside of your mind to not let you remember God, because it doesn't want to lose its station, doesn't want to lose its power. So that is at least part of why it's so hard for us to remember God, for us to remember that we're in the reality of God, and that we need to keep reminding ourselves that all the time, constantly, that we're in God. There's other reasons too, but that's the one the Rav is bringing here. Selective memory, right? It selects what it wants to remember, and it only remembers what is good for itself. It only remembers what is empowering for it, that will give it more power and control. The path of Judaism, final passage. The path of Judaism involves navigating two polar opposites. This is a similar passage that we've discussed before. The path of Judaism involves navigating two polar opposites, right? And that is the body and the spirit. The matter and soul, light and the vessel. So here, the path of Judaism is about navigating these polar opposites, about embracing them both as part of creation, as part of the purpose of creation, and putting them into their rightful place, honoring them the way that they need to be honored, navigating them to create a harmony instead of a disharmony, which is what happens when they're left to their own accounts. So the path of Judaism is about navigating these two polar opposites and finding the way to make tikkun, spiritual repair on them, to integrate and incorporate them in a way that's aligned with the divine, that's aligned with the purpose of creation. Okay, folks, have a wonderful night.